Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are in the world, and welcome to today's HDI webinar, IT Excellence in the Age of Digital Transformation. Today's webinar is brought to you by Freshworks. There's a link to their website right in the Attachments tab on your BrightTalk window. You can connect with HDI on Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn, and on our community site, HDI Connect, and subscribe to our Single Point of Contact podcast, Spotcast, in iTunes or SoundCloud. HDI, smarter service, better business. I'm Andrew Gillum, Associate Analyst at HDI. We have just a few housekeeping announcements before we begin. If you are experiencing any technical problems, please refresh your browser. You can participate in the Q&A session by asking questions at any time during this webcast, and they will be answered during the Q&A session toward the end of our webcast. You can download the slides from today's presentation by opening the Attachments tab on your BrightTalk screen, and be sure to check out the links you'll find there as well. There will be some audience polls throughout our webcast today, and you can respond to those polls in the Vote tab below the presentation window. Remember, today's webinar will be available on demand shortly after the completion of this live webcast, and you'll receive an email reminder when it becomes available. Slides will advance automatically throughout this event. And now I am excited to introduce our speakers who we have on the line today. Michael Spires is the principal of the Hackett Group, leading the technology transformation practice. He has close to 30 years of operational and strategic leadership experience specializing in technology strategy, outsourcing, shared services, process improvement, merger integration, operations, and cost improvement. Mr. Spires has directed a number of engagements for Fortune 500 companies undergoing technology and operational transformations, including outsourcing, post-merger integration, and shared services expansion and redesign. Mr. Spires has held industry roles in technology and operations for Fortune 100 retailers, in addition to his 20-plus years of strategy and technology consulting roles. Also on the line, we have HDI's 2019 Lifetime Achievement Award honoree, Roy Atkinson. He's one of the top influencers in the service and support industry. His blogs, presentations, research reports, white papers, keynotes, and webinars have gained him an international reputation. In his role as Group Principal Analyst, he acts as HDI's in-house subject matter expert, bringing his years of experience to the community. He holds a Master's Certificate in Advanced Management Strategy from Tulane University's Freeman School of Business, and he is a certified HDI Support Center Manager. Follow Roy on Twitter at Roy Atkinson. Thank you both for joining us today. We'll be using some polling questions for the audience throughout our discussion. To respond to those, just click on the Vote tab in the presentation screen and make your selection. And I'm also going to ask some open-ended questions from the audience. You may respond to these from the Ask a Question tab. Additionally, if you do have any questions during the discussion, submit them in the Ask a Question tab right away. If we don't answer your question during the discussion, we'll save it until the end of the webcast. And without further delay, let's talk about IT excellence in the age of digital transformation. So to get started on our discussion about digital transformation, I think it's first important that we define and come to an understanding of what that is. So I'll ask each of our speakers, what does digital transformation mean to you in your own words? Michael, I'll start with you.
So digital transformation to me is about getting to your customers both internally and externally with speed. It can be whether cloud or your mobile and web apps, but really enabling faster insights and touch points with your customers.
Fantastic. And Roy, what does digital transformation mean in your own words?
I think digital transformation is all about business transformation. It's the transformation of processes and practices within the business to make it more customer-centric, to deliver services to customers as rapidly as possible using modern technology. So the digital is secondary, the transformation is primary, and it's really about business transformation.
Fantastic. And on that note, I want to start by hearing from our audience with a poll question. I'd like to know, is your business currently engaged in a business transformation project? And you can respond. You'll see under the orange arrow on your screen, there's a vote tab there. So click to tell us if you're in the middle of a transformation project, if you've just started one, or if you have one that you're planning to start soon, if you're hoping to start one in 2020, or if you don't have any plans just yet. And then once you do that, I'd like you to go over to the Ask a Question tab under the blue arrow on your screen and tell me a little bit about that project that you're working on, or maybe what you're hoping to get started. I'll close the poll here in just a moment. Once you vote, be sure to go under the Ask a Question tab and tell me a little bit about the type of transformation project you're working on. All right, and that wraps up our voting. So let's have a look at our responses here. 80% of the audience say that you are in the middle of a transformation. Oh, it just updated. We've got 72% in the middle of a transformation project. 9% of you have just started one, and another 9% are planning to start one of those soon. And then another 9% says that you have no plans to begin a transformation project just yet, but I'm sure you're collecting ideas and research here today. So what I'd like to hear from our speakers are what many of us are undergoing these types of transformation initiatives. What all can they include? And Mike, I'll start with you. What are some typical transformation initiatives that you see being undertaken?
So setting up product teams to better drive digital engagement with your customers. So if you think about like a medical company looking to set up a patient app, or a retailer looking to set up the mobile and digital supply chain across the whole organization. Those are often things that are outward facing, and then internally it is about creating those capabilities around cloud, around products, around agile, around again, really being able to deliver those business transformations that Roy alluded to earlier.
Excellent. And Roy, also I'd like to hear from you. What sort of transformation initiatives, business transformation initiatives, are you seeing being undertaken now?
I think it really varies from industry to industry. I think there's a tremendous amount of innovation going on in the higher education industry right now, simply because of the demand for online learning, among other things. A lot of universities are really looking at a digital transformation overhaul and trying to get social, mobile, and applications in the hands of their customers, and a lot of universities refer to their students as customers as opposed to their users, who might be faculty and staff, but trying to empower people to take a little bit more control of how they go about learning. That's also true in healthcare IT. There's an awful lot going on there in trying to empower patients and staff to have a little bit more control over data, how they interface with it, how the information is delivered to them. So again, business processes being transformed through digital technologies.
Excellent. And there are business transformation objectives that happen outside of IT in the larger business space. I'm curious, Roy, do you think that those transformation initiatives have affected IT's role within the business any?
Absolutely. One of the things that we've seen in our research is the increase in demand on the support system within the organization. So lots of increases in not only IT-related support, but also non-IT related support, because this dovetails, the whole idea of digital transformation also dovetails with things like enterprise service management. So rolling out the practices and processes of service management to the entire organization, using common tools, finding common data pools and that type of thing can empower. Again, it's about shifting the power more to the people who are consuming the information and using the tools. So, yes, very much so.
Awesome. And I just noticed that we had some feedback from the audience. It looks like some of us in the audience are working on moving toward the cloud or enhancing their processes and knowledge, moving closer to automation in support as well. Now, Mike, I think you have a good slide about how IT is coming along in the transformation process. Tell us a little bit about this, because it sort of follows up our initial poll question with where people are at right now with IT's transformation.
Right. So this comes from our key issue study this year, 2020, which polls leaders in technology across a pretty broad spectrum of the business population, all the way from small companies to Fortune 10 in size. But roughly half have either just started or are in sort of the early stages, 1 to 2 years of what they consider their digital transformation. And still, 1 in 6 to 1 in 7 haven't started at all. There's a growing set of companies that have been at this for 3 to 4 or even 5 years. I think they would also tell you that they still have a long way to go. And a lot of what they're really focused on are on the top two there are customer and stakeholder satisfaction and experience improvement, and or the operational agility, the ability to deliver technology and business services faster to your customers. You can see the rest there. And then, in the attachments and links, this document is available if you want to download it. You can look at it full size. Some of the text can be a little difficult to read if you're kind of reading in a split screen.
Fantastic. So I see that we have some of the benefits that were expected. Before we move on, I just want to ask a couple more questions on that. That's fine. So I see that the stakeholder experience and the customer experience and also that agility are some of the expected benefits. What do you think are some of the primary drivers of transformation initiatives?
I think there's probably 2 or 3. First off is you've got to be able to do this to compete. If you're not doing it, your competitor is, and you've got to keep up. You can't be in a market where your competition's getting there faster and with a more focused message to your customers. And really, the second is because old technology is kind of at some level going away. Whether you think about the old ERPs operating in a mainframe or a large data center, a lot of that is going to become harder and harder to maintain from a cost and a skills perspective. And so as you look at the workforce coming in, they're more interested in this technology as well. And making that transition is almost a requirement to stay current within your workforce as well. And then finally, all of this drives data and analytics to be able to better understand your customers and your operations and be able to drive faster responses to the market than your competition and create better value for your customers.
And Roy, how does that align with what you've been seeing in your talks with folks who are out in the industry and service and support? What's driving their interest in business transformation?
I think a lot of it is actually driven from user demand, and simply because people are asking questions that then raise possibilities within the organization. So why can't we have an app that does this? Or why can't we maybe attend our classes virtually this way? Or, so a lot of the ideas are coming from the outside in. We also have younger generation, new generation coming in that are used to using consumer technology. They're used to having things personalized. They're used to being able to access things. And so that changes the complexion of how the services are delivered to those people because they're used to doing it one way. So it's tied also with consumerization, and that explains why it's important that the customer experience is considered in this, because those are the folks who are using the services and also asking for services.
Fantastic. Thank you, Roy. And that brings us into our next section. And I want to talk a little bit about strategic priorities. There is a resource in the attachments. It's a report from the Hackett Group where they research what are the top priorities for IT leaders in 2020. And secure data and systems is number one on the priority list for 2020. I'm sure that doesn't take anyone by surprise. Mike, I'm curious to hear from you. What are some characteristics of a well-operating IT organization from a security perspective? And is there anything that our IT service and support leaders can do differently or better to advance the organization's security posture?
So I think being clear on how security is managed within the organization is first and foremost. We see in many organizations multiple teams that believe they have responsibility for security, and they can actually work at cross purposes to each other, either creating vulnerabilities across their security let's call it infrastructure, as well as adding overhead to projects and your ability to get to market in a way that confuses people doing development, internal customers, all the different sort of people who use the security services. And we found that creating easy-to-use tools and templates to make sure that security is integrated from the very beginning and it's not sort of a heavy overlay also makes it a lot easier to have a secure and streamlined security structure.
Excellent. Roy, what have you seen from talking to IT service and support leaders? What are they trying to do to advance their organization's security posture, and what are some ways that they could potentially contribute to that mission?
So a lot of organizations, of course, have adopted DevOps, the DevOps approach, and including what's called DevSecOps, which is security baked in from the beginning of the development of a particular application, let's say. Less quality inspection before the end product gets delivered to production, deliver it at a high velocity, make smaller iterations, all of that, and make sure the security is baked in. The other thing is that a lot of organizations are really trying to make sure that even if security is led by one particular office or one particular team, that many elements of the organization are involved. And we've talked a little bit about this at HDI, how the service desk has a role to play here in communication and coordination and making sure that they're reporting things that they see as possibly suspicious, et cetera. But every group within the organization has a role to play, so training becomes important, and having policies and having responsibilities properly delegated becomes really important as well. Security is everybody's job.
Wonderful way to put it, Roy. So I'm at this point now, I'd like to hear from our audience. Once again, what are your strategic priorities? What's your top priority for 2020? Obviously, security impacts a lot of us, but what else in addition to security is on your mind. So that includes data and analytics, aligning skills with business needs, cost efficiency, the agility of your IT operation, or something else. And regardless of what those are, I'd love to hear some of the things that you're doing in your organization to around these priorities, what you're doing to accomplish them, or if it's something that I don't have listed here, share that in the Ask a Question tab. And again, if you selected something else, go over to the Ask a Question tab and submit that so that we can see it and discuss it as part of our chat today. And I'm going to go ahead and stop the voting here in just a second. Last chance to get those in. And drum roll, please, while we tally the results. All right. Half of us said that your top priority is aligning skills with business needs. Those are definitely changing as our operations evolve, as businesses transform. Cost efficiency is also on the list for 10% of you, along with the agility of your IT operation. So if you chose something else, and about a third of you did, go into the Ask a Question tab and go ahead and let me know what is the other thing that is at the top of your priority list this year. Now, I noticed that enabling enterprise analytics is also high on the 2020 priorities list that the Hackett Group compiled. And Mike, I'd like to hear more from you about what does that look like? How do we enable those analytics? Is it a matter of buying the right tools, hiring the right people, training the right skills, or do you think it's something else?
It's a combination of a number of things. One actually aligns with the poll results, right? It's having the right skills aligned to your business needs, and kind of making sure that the business has the right level of data to do analytics on. And IT's responsibility in that role is really to provide the right tools and help with governance to make sure that the business understands their own data and how their actions and processes impact that data, so that they can have that end-to-end view. A lot of times in many organizations, data becomes a very siloed thing, and someone in marketing views their data different than someone in operations does, and yet really they should be using the same data in different ways and having sort of the same version of the truth, and that can be very challenging in many legacy organizations who've built data structures over decades and are kind of trying to migrate from that to a more forward-looking integrated data set. And so then, it becomes around how do you drive insights from that data as opposed to just, traditional reports that show how you're doing in hindsight, but how do you actually begin to use that data to make forward-looking decisions?
Excellent. I can definitely relate to the struggle of having just one database, one source of truth for the whole organization. Roy, what have you seen in terms of the service and support industry that we serve? How are they helping to enable enterprise analytics?
So first of all, let me state that Mike, unfortunately, we don't have video here, so you couldn't hear me nodding as you were talking about that, because I'm on board with exactly with what you said. I think that support organizations, when you drill down to that level, you tend to look at things from an immediate perspective, an operational perspective. What data do we need to gather? What do we need to report on? And I think it's really important for any types of analytics that we specify exactly what it is that we need, that we really feel we can act on, and work with that, because we can overwhelm ourselves. We can get all kinds of data points from all over the organization pouring in, and then we're flooded with it. So we need to scope the amount of data that we're looking at and have the right tools, and an awful lot of organizations are investing in analytics tools right now. So let's hope that they're properly using them and scoping that properly.
Awesome. And one of our audience members shared that they are in the process, and it's their top priority for 2020 to re-engineer some of their ITSM processes, change configuration management, request fulfillment in their service catalog, and I'm sure that analytics will play a role in shaping the direction of those activities coming up. Now, Roy, I've got another question for you, and we alluded to this in the description of our webinar today. HDI research says that 64% of IT leaders are making investments in business transformation. Where are those investments being targeted, and how have you seen that change over time?
I think the priorities definitely have changed over time. Many organizations are doing upgrades to existing systems, or they're looking at broader systems, looking again at that common data pool, trying to centralize a lot of the data in the organization, and that means enterprise service management, basically, so that all the different business units are drawing from the same data pool and contributing to the same data pool with appropriate permissions for each area, of course, to read and report. So I think that's one of the areas. So updates to IT service management tools, definitely. And then peripherally around that, making investments in things like mobile apps for their organization if they don't already have them, making investments in automation, and looking at how AI and machine learning can augment what they're already doing.
Excellent. I want to shift focus just a little bit. The Hackett Group has provided this slide, and this slide itself, as well as the report where this data came from, is available for download in the Attachments tab in BrightTalk. I noticed that the report noted that cost efficiency as a priority took a little vacation, but it's back in 2020. And Mike, I'm curious to hear from you, what's driving that motivation? It seems like it was gone for a couple years, and now cost efficiency is back at number 4.
So I think it's two main things. One is there is, even prior to the outbreak of the coronavirus, concerns about recession. A boom market can only go so far and so long, and I think the longer it went on, the more people realized, hey, if we don't focus on it now while things are good, we're going to be forced to later. Secondly, digital transformation is not a zero-cost effort, and a lot of organizations are realizing that if they don't sort of optimize the back-end costs of many of these, they cannot afford to do digital transformation. So really those two things are driving, I think, the reentry of cost focus into the discussion.
And from your experience, because you get to work with a lot of different organizations, is there anything that maybe we learned from when this was a priority back in 2017, for instance, that we should be using to shape our strategy today now that it's a priority again? And are there any things that have changed since 2017 that might give us better opportunities to be more cost efficient?
I think the role of outsourcing has changed. A lot of people thought, if I just outsource and I reduce the labor cost associated with a task, even if it's not quite as efficient, they still gain in the end. They realized that it became harder to manage at times, and the costs would creep back in. And really being able to think about how do you partner better and have partners that are looking to optimize cost for you at the same time, and creating this transformation that really reduces the level of activity, not just takes the cost of your labor and reduces it, but actually takes the amount of effort that it takes to get new things done, the amount of effort that it takes for support, and really takes that work out of the system. Those are sort of the main things from my perspective.
Wonderful. 2 years can be a long time in the IT business. And Roy, I'm curious to hear what you think. Are there any lessons learned over the last couple years that can help us change our approach to cost efficiency and maybe shape our strategy?
I said a long time ago in a paper or a post somewhere that cost reduction is not a strategy. You're not going to win that game by cutting your costs. What you have to do is strategically invest. And I think that that is really important now, and I think that that is where this emphasis on cost efficiency comes from. Notice it's cost efficiency in this report. And it's applying the dollars correctly that's important. Years ago, a lot of organizations could afford to throw many, many dollars at information technology. It was new, it was neat, it was cool. Get the latest tool, slap it in. Those days are gone. Now we really have to focus on what's important to the organization, to our customers, our users, and what is going to make the organization better as a result. So cost efficiency is a great way to put it. Thank you, Mike.
And that brings us right into the IT excellence portion of our discussion today. And again, I'd like to hear from each of you in your own words, what is IT excellence? I'll start with you, Roy.
It's producing information technology systems and running IT systems that produce the right results. And those results are business results and good results, successful results for end users and customers, right? It is reducing downtime. It is making sure that people have the correct tools, the best tools that they need, and that you are in a secure environment with your information technology. It's all of those things wrapped up.
And Mike, how about you? How do you define IT excellence?
I would define it in 3 tiers, and Roy alluded to each of these in his conversation too. But starts with operational excellence, and that is delivery of services in the right way. It gets to the commenter on the ITSM and having a service catalog, and those are really table stakes to any excellence within technology is having the right processes and having the right way of doing things. Secondly, I would call it technology excellence, which is really driving the tools to be where they need to be given today's technology environment. Having 15-year-old green screens isn't going to cut it, right? And actually, being able to use new architectures and new technology in the best way possible. And then lastly, and certainly not least importantly, but in fact most importantly, is that IT business alignment. Technology comes only to serve business outcomes. Technology for technology's sake is not a good thing. It's an expensive thing. And really focusing on what business outcomes are you trying to drive and being very aligned with the business on what's important to them and what are their priorities so that technology really supports those in an excellent way.
Wonderful. And that brings us to our next poll question. I'd like to hear from our audience. How would you rate your organization's level of IT excellence? Do you think you're world-class in terms of cost, quality, and value? Are you doing really well in service and speed, but maybe it's too costly? Or are your costs well controlled, but you could be struggling with some quality? Or if you feel like you're struggling to achieve excellence in any area, but I hope we don't have too many that have to check that box. So click on the Vote tab in Bright Talk to vote. And then I'd like you to weigh in under that Ask a Question tab and tell me, maybe if you're feeling really good about one area, but you're struggling in another, what's that area you're struggling with? So go ahead and vote now. And while we're waiting on the audience to vote and share some of their experiences and struggles here, I'll ask our panel again, how do you know if you're excellent? Roy, that would be a good question for you. How should we be determining this?
Well, there's a few ways that you can do that. One of the ways that I look at is the ratio or the relationship between incidents and service requests. Service requests are good from the perspective that people want to take part in your offerings. They want to take advantage of the things that you're doing. Incidents bad because that means stuff is breaking, right? That's IT's report card, essentially. And still, to this day, there are more incidents than there are service requests. About 46% of tickets are currently incidents, about 43% are service requests, and the rest are basically undetermined. So that's one way to do it. The other way is, how happy are your customers? So whether you measure customer satisfaction in the traditional CSAT sense, or you're measuring customer effort, CES, customer effort score, or net promoter score, some way to measure that satisfaction, make sure that you're doing it right, and listen to what your customers tell you. Just don't do surveys. Talk to them and make sure that you're offering the right things and delivering it in the right way. So those combinations of things, delivering stable, secure services and having your customers be satisfied with them, is really important.
Excellent. And I'm going to go ahead and close the voting here. So if you haven't voted yet, this is your last chance to join in there. And we'll take just a moment to tally up the results. And then don't forget, if you are struggling in a particular area, tell us what that is. Use that Ask a Question tab and share that with us so that we can see it. And it looks like many of us were either unsure of how we're doing, or we feel like we're struggling to achieve excellence in any particular area. That makes up 60% of our total group here. I'd really love to hear what you're struggling with. So use that Ask a Question tab to tell us the areas of concern for you. The rest of us, 20% said that our costs are well controlled, but quality has suffered. I definitely can relate to that struggle. And it looks like some of us are doing a little bit better. 10% said that the service is great, but it's a little too expensive. And at the top, we have 10% who say they're world-class in terms of both cost, quality, and value there. So I'll ask both of our panelists. We have a lot of folks who feel like they're struggling or are unsure how they're doing. If you're not excellent, what is maybe one of the top things that you'd focus on first? And I'll start with you, Mike.
I think it really is getting to that process quality and understanding where are the breakdowns occurring. And, you know, part of that is measuring and having good data internally on what you're doing well and what you're not. You know, as you asked the question earlier, one of the ways to measure, and you know, my boss would kind of yell at me if I didn't say this, but is to do a benchmark and to really understand where you fit within a peer group and world class, to say, let's have a baseline here of where we fit, and let's work to improve that and have specific things to do that. And a lot of that really is understanding where you're falling down and what processes are driving those gaps.
Great answer. And Roy, I'll give you a chance to weigh in. If you are concerned that maybe you're not excellent right now, what are some things that you can focus on first?
I think that one of the things you want to do is, if you work for the support center or service desk, you need to communicate with the other groups within IT. You need to find out what's breaking. You need to know what's breaking. You're going to take your top 10, look at the things that are breaking, and say, okay, what can we do to help this particular thing? Do we need more problem management? Do we need better infrastructure? And have that conversation with the other units within IT. But don't be afraid to speak up and say, well, here's what we see. We've got data on this. This thing is part of a problem that our users are seeing consistently. Let's see if we can get that addressed within the budgets that we have, et cetera. But work with the other units. You know, Barclay Ray is a wonderful gentleman from the UK who came out with a system years ago called ITSM Goodness. And one of the things he said, it was point number 6 out of 7, and it was get all of IT working together. and that is one of the best things you can do to try to deliver good services, is make sure that you're coordinating those and you're not fighting with each other or throwing things over the wall or pointing fingers. Work together with the other units to make sure that you're doing what your customers need and what your business needs.
That one team, one company mentality, I think, is really important, especially for larger organizations that may be a little bit siloed or disjointed in that way. So I want to pivot a little bit and talk again about cost. I think a lot of us know that IT has struggled for a long time to be more than a cost center, and I think most of us here would agree that there's incredible promise for IT to be an important value driver for the organizations that we serve. Roy, what's your take on progress in communicating that message?
I think it's something that a lot of organizations are focused on right now. They want to understand how it is that IT creates value and how that value is delivered across the organization and out to the customers. That is really the focus of ITIL 4, which is now 1 year old. It's value streams and the whole value chain across an organization and delivering that value to customers. And many organizations are really doing their homework now to see how it is that they generate value. How can they accelerate sales? How can they improve products by adding components or adding features to them that really deliver benefit to the customers and provide innovation within the organization that they can then sell, basically, and have their customers appreciate.
Awesome. And I would just want to give a shout out to a member of our audience who said, LOL at getting all of IT to work together. Welcome to Siloville. I have been there and I definitely feel that struggle sometimes. So I want to touch on the role of customer centricity. Mike, what do you think is the part that customer centricity plays in achieving excellence?
It should play a primary role. If you think about your customer broadly speaking from IT, it's your internal customers as well as the end customers of your company. And, ultimately the technology needs to serve one, the other, or both. Otherwise, it's not serving a purpose. And so really making sure that you are aligned to what those customers need is the core of good technology. Bad technology is technology for technology's sake, and it's set up to do what IT perceives as the problem rather than your customer perceives or actually has as a problem. So working collaboratively and understanding both your internal customers and your external customers is central to having excellent IT.
Wonderful. Now, in order to become excellent, occasionally technology investments are needed there. So I'd like to ask our panelists, and I'll start with you, Roy, if you had to choose just one piece of technology to drive your digital transformation forward, what would it be and why?
Well, I think maybe the standard answer, which I think is at least partially my answer, is use the cloud. Use it effectively. Use it wherever possible. You can save an awful lot of money in the long run by investing in cloud capabilities. One of the ways you can do that, of course, is having redundant data centers as opposed to or tape backups that are delivered to Iron Mountain. That stuff costs a tremendous amount of money. Plus, the cloud, especially think about now where we have a lot of people who just started working from home, making the technologies available to them through cloud services is really important and usually quite cost effective. So that would be the first place I would look to start investing. If you're not in the cloud now in a lot of areas in your organization, how can you get there and what can you do with it?
Wonderful. And I'll also ask you the same question, Michael. If you had to choose one piece of technology to drive your digital or business transformation forward, what would it be and why?
So for me, it's about data, and it's not necessarily a single piece of technology, but having a sound data architecture The ability to abstract data using APIs and normalize data sets is really a requirement for speed. A lot of what people struggle with, whether it be in the cloud or in their current data centers, is how do I make sure that I don't have to test everything end to end if it's all connected through basically hardwiring and dedicated interfaces. So creating that abstraction through APIs and data normalization allows you not to have to test end-to-end for your mobile app or your app that really is just customer-facing. You can make progress and changes much faster if you can do that. And then it also enables you to make faster market responses because now you have good data, you have data that's been normalized and standardized across the organization. So ultimately it comes back to data for me.
Fantastic. Now, as on the topic of technology, I want to know from our audience, have technology investments in advanced technologies like artificial intelligence, for instance, have they transformed your business? So click on the Vote tab in BrightTalk and let me know that they've transformed your business, or maybe you have them but you don't feel they've been transformational, or if you haven't invested in those advanced technologies yet, go ahead and respond there. And if you're using something now and you like it, if transformed your business, tell us how. Or if you are trying something and you just don't feel like it's quite reached the transformational level, tell us about that using the Ask a Question tab. All right, we've got some results coming in. Go ahead and get those votes in here now, and I'll close the polling in just a second. All right, I'm closing the polling, and we'll take just a second for those results to be tabulated. All right, and it looks like 60% of our audience has these advanced technologies, but you don't feel that they've been transformational, and another 40% you just haven't invested in these technologies yet. And Mike, I noticed that you had some slides regarding the results and the outcomes from these technology investments. So I'm curious, what have you seen along these lines? Do you feel like these advanced technologies are being really transformational?
Not yet. If you look at sort of the internal satisfaction, so if you look at the slide you have up here, right? If you think about the business objectives that were set out when they invested in these, many are not meeting it. Over 50% for advanced analytics, 50% for data visualization, AI over 50% again. And then if you look at the numbers investing, it's not large scale in any case really. 21% for data visualization is the highest, and there's still a large gap between people who've invested in it heavily and those who are either just starting or haven't. And I think a lot of the dissatisfaction is directly related to the fact that people are throwing technology at a problem rather than solving a problem with technology. I think the distinction is important, and really kind of trying to say, all right, what problem are we trying to solve, and how do we use the technology to do this? Whereas many organizations that fail look at this and say, hey, our competition's using AI and they're using data visualization. We need to get after it rather than having a plan that's integrated with business use cases and outcomes in mind. And so it really is kind of flipping the technology decision on its head and trying to throw technology at a problem rather than addressing a problem with technology.
Got it. I also see some of our audience members are noting that AI is a learning process. Some of you have virtual agents for your chat support, and you're just not feeling like the tool is quite as robust as what you were expecting, and maybe still a little bit skeptical about how AI affects will be transformational, or the transformational possibilities. On the note, since we brought up bots, I want to turn it over to Roy for a second, because I'd like to know what, Roy, from you, what role does self-service play in the strategic priorities that we were discussing?
So self-service can be a big area of transformation, right, if it's done right. And we have a couple of slides here from our research and knowledge, user-facing knowledge and knowledge management. And one of the things that we discovered was that the most organizations, the largest percentage of organizations that are putting user-facing knowledge in place are responding to demand from users. And I alluded to that earlier. So 33% of the organizations that said, yes, we've got user-facing technology, did it in order to respond to user requests. But on the other hand, and I think that might be on the next slide, only some of those organizations have been successful, because the highest percentage of organizations that responded to this question also said that we can't get users to adopt it. So what's the issue here? We're putting it in place because they're asking for it, but they're not adopting it. Well, that means one thing, and the answer is you're doing it wrong. You're not really putting the right tools in place. And I think this is one of the areas where advanced technologies can be extremely important. We're getting to the point now where machine learning and artificial intelligence can be used with self-service technologies, so that we don't have to ask our users to go to a portal. We don't have to ask them to go to a destination to get an answer. The answer will be presented to them. There might be a button on a website page if they're looking at that, or a button within an application if they're working in that application that directly answers questions they might have about the particular operation that they're doing at that time, instead of asking them to go somewhere to get the answer. So that can make things really effective for them. They don't have to go poking. They can get the answers they need quickly and efficiently, but you have to really step through this very carefully. You've got to make sure that you have the right tool to be able to do it, and that you have the right data. You know, Mike said data is important. You betcha. When you're talking about machine learning and artificial intelligence, data is everything. And the bigger the data pool, the more likely that these things are going to work well. So it's important to be careful in how you apply these, and make sure that you do everything you can do to optimize their performance.
Wonderful. And on that note, I'd like to ask Mike, what does it take to start an effective self-service program? Are there any pitfalls that you've seen that our IT service and support leaders should avoid?
A lot of, in many of the cases here that we've talked about, not just the specific example around self-service or automated support, the lack of organizational change management and communication drives a lot of confusion and lack of adoption. Technology is often not the underlying problem, even necessarily how it was implemented. It's just not well communicated. Technologists, generally speaking, struggle communicating in terms that their user community and their customers understand. And so creating a clear, here's why we're doing this, here's the value to you, here's the benefit to you, and this is why it's better than what you had before, is often overlooked. It's much more, hey, we've got a self-service tool, go use it. Well, that usually doesn't work. It's much more, putting it out there and kind of, using, as I said, use cases and driving examples. So, taking someone who's had a good experience and having them talk on a Yammer page about, technology changes can be more impactful than anything IT does. If they've got their peers out there talking it up and you have good examples of how it's been successful and how it's helped people, you're going to have more success rolling things like that out than if you just kind of throw it out there. And too often it's just thrown out there.
So word-of-mouth marketing applies to internal support and internal communication as well. I want to jump ahead to our Q&A portion here. We've got a question from the audience. that says, I'm curious how companies, maybe even service desks, get to the place where they can utilize the technologies that we discussed today. From the service desk level, what can they do? Do they start pushing for this? It's confusing about how to transform service desk with the artificial intelligence and advanced technologies. Mike, I'll let you take the first bat at that one.
Well, I think a lot of that really is understanding what's driving volume, and if you think about ITIL problem management and what common solutions to issues that can't necessarily be resolved through fixing the underlying technology. It really comes back to understanding your data and being able to drive solutions based on your data. If you're looking for AI and automation to be a panacea, it really isn't. You really kind of do have to do that groundwork of analyzing the process and data and then addressing it with the technology.
Fantastic. And Roy, I'll let you weigh in on that one as well. I would just add to that, and this is addressing the person who said, LOL, welcome to Siloville, get all of IT working together, haha. That's a cultural issue. That's an organizational change issue. And as Mike was saying, that is often a component that's missing from every aspect of this. You really have to get the culture on board to make this stuff work. If people in the organization are talking about self-service or knowledge management or transformation or customer focus or anything, if they're not on board culturally, and if the leadership is not there leading the way to break those silos and make sure that people are focused on the objective, it's not going to work. So it's exceedingly important to have that human factor built into everything that we do.
Great explanation. Thank you so much for that, Roy. And I just want to ask our audience to take a moment to rate this webinar. It really helps us to choose content and to develop educational series that will be of value to you. So take a moment to rate the webinar. And then I'd also, just wrapping up, like to invite you all to join us again for our next webinar on April 21st at 1 p.m. Eastern, 10 a.m. Pacific. And thank you to our speakers for joining us today, Roy and Michael. This webcast is copyright 2020 by Informatech. The presentation materials are owned or copyrighted by HDI, which is solely responsible for its content, and the individual speakers are solely responsible for their content and opinions. On behalf of HDI, I'd like to thank you all for attending and have a great day.